Okay, for this topic, we're going to be going over the jQuery syntax. So let's jump right into it. So, the jQuery syntax, how is it structured and how do we use it? Well, with jQuery, you select HTML elements and jQuery performs some kind of actions on them, also known as methods or vice versa functions. So the basic syntax for jQuery is a $, followed by parentheses, and inside the parentheses is going to be an HTML element, or also known as a selector, and after it's going to have a dot to connect a action to it, or a method or a function. So I'll just use the term function, and a function performs the same action as a method. It's vice versa. So with the function, you're going to perform an action on the HTML selector, which is extremely easy. That's what jQuery allows us to do. So what is a selector? Well, a selector is just an HTML element that we can select and perform an action on, or a function. So an action is just the method or function or the action to perform. So pretty much we're just asking jQuery, hey, if we select this HTML element, can you perform an action on it? Yes, it grants us permission and it performs the action. Now, the $, it actually defines or it accesses the jQuery library for the syntax. So once we put a $, it tells us, hey, we're going to allow jQuery to use the syntax. This is jQuery syntax and not just a plain old JavaScript syntax, because we're fancy now. So a selector to find HTML elements. So that's all a selector does. It just finds HTML elements for us to perform actions on. Now, a jQuery action to be performed on the elements are just normal functions that we either define ourselves, or we can call jQuery functions to perform the actions. So let's look at some examples. So you can either follow along with me by going into your example folder and go into the file. It's called syntax_example.html. You guys can pull up the source code and follow with me, or you can just follow along with me and I'll explain this as well. So this is just a basic HTML element and a document. So again, I'll show you the important tags, which is the scripts. So right here on line 8, I just wrote a comment saying initialize JavaScripts during page load. Now, since they are in a section after the page loads, it's going to load these as well, these scripts. So on line 8, it's just a plain old JavaScript tag. And what it's doing, it's going into the actual location of the directory, which is JavaScript as a folder, and the file is going to be inside this JavaScript folder, and the file name is jQuery-1.11.3.js. So it's just a plain old JavaScript file, and this is actually the jQuery library. So it's going to include all of the actions and functions that we can use in the jQuery library. So once we define our second script, we can actually start creating our own functions and our customized actions as well to use with jQuery. So once we go into that, I'll show you some of these examples as well. So let me just go back into the PowerPoint. So the document ready event. So what does this document ready event mean? Well, what it does is that once the document is fully loaded, it calls the ready function inside the jQuery library, and it shows us that the jQuery library is ready for us to use its functions. So again, we can actually show our users or ourselves that the JavaScript jQuery library has been loaded successfully. So let's actually do some live examples for you. So let me just go back to examples, and let me go to the source code as well. So as we look at the ready function first, like I said again, what it's doing on line 14, it's waiting for the document to load in the jQuery library, which is right here on line 9. And anything inside the curly braces, it performs if the library is 100% loaded. So all I did was register some event listeners, and I'll show you what event listeners are and how jQuery uses them in the future. But just for right now, for the examples, I registered some listeners, and again, it's registered with a click event. So this is also known as an action or a function. So if I scroll down, I'll show you my HTML. So from line 53 to line 55, I just included some basic paragraph tags, paragraph 1, 2, and 3, and I gave it class names and specific IDs as well. So once we go back up, so once the jQuery library loads successfully, the first thing I want to do is register these event listeners. I want to attach click events to them. So if I click on different paragraph elements, I want something to happen, or I want an action to happen. So when I click the first paragraph, I want it to call the hide paragraph with specific ID function. So if we scroll down here and I define these functions, so I called it hide paragraph with specific ID. And if we look at line 35, this is our syntax for jQuery, which I'll show you. So inside the quotation marks, I'm referencing an ID on an HTML element. I'm using the ID selector. As you can see, it's a hash symbol, and the hash symbol specifies you're using the ID reference of an element, followed by the ID name that you gave it. And all I'm doing is I'm just calling an action. I'm pretty much just giving it a jQuery function. So I'm saying, hey, jQuery, I selected an element with the ID paragraph _1. Can you hide it for me? And jQuery says, of course I can. Thank you for asking. And this is a jQuery function, which is hide. It's just a single line of code. Now, if we go down to the second function, this is my function that I've created. And if we look at line 41, this is a jQuery syntax again. And what this is going to do, we're going to hide all of the paragraph tags at once. Not just one, but all of them. That's what this does. And again, the hide is a jQuery function, and the selector is just the HTML selector that selects all of those elements with the tag name P. So I'm going to hide all the paragraph tags in this function. Now for our last function, I wanted to hide all paragraphs by class name. So as we can look inside here, it's using the class selector, which is just the dot followed by the class name. And I wanted to hide the paragraphs with the specific paragraph class name. And as you can see at the bottom, I mixed them up just for this example to show you that it does work. So I saved it, and I'm going to run it in my browser. I'm going to click on Firefox, and I'll go through it with you as well. Let me just wait for my Firefox browser to load up. And again, this is extremely simple. It makes your life a lot easier. So if we scroll up, and I'll show you. So paragraph 1, 2, and 3, in the first function that I defined was by the ID. So I said I wanted to hide graph with a specific ID. And if I scroll down here, go to the jQuery function, I wanted to hide it with the ID reference paragraph _1. And if I go here and I click it, look what happens. It disappears. Now I just have the paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. So if I just refresh my browser and get it back up and running, let's go to the second function. So if we look at line 41, it's going to hide all of the paragraphs. That's all it's doing. So like I said, the selector is just to select a specific HTML element, and it's going to hide all of them because we're using the jQuery function hide. So if we go back to my browser and I click that, it's going to hide all of them again. If I click either 2 or 3, it's going to hide all of them on the paragraph 2 clicks. So let me refresh it. Like I said, different clicks on these paragraphs perform different actions and different functions. So if we go down to a paragraph by class name, so only paragraph 2 and 3 have the same class names, as we can see, just paragraph underscore class for paragraph 2 and 3, and paragraph 1 has a different class name. So if I go back here, let me refresh it just to make sure. I click paragraph 3, and paragraph 2 and 3 disappears as follows, because again, the selector, we're using the class selector that has the paragraph underscore class name reference, and we're hiding both of those. So again, when you refresh it, I'll click paragraph 3, and you'll see paragraph 2 and 3 will disappear, as you can see. Refresh it, and I click paragraph 2, and all of them will disappear, as we can see right here. We're using just the HTML element to select all of them with the same element name, and they all disappear. And again, refresh it. Paragraph 1 just removes paragraph 1 or hides it, as you can see. So pretty much that's easy and simple with the hide function that we use. So like I said, we can use the jQuery function to hide elements that we can select from our selectors.